Are you in a band? Are you an entertainment entrepreneur? Are you a musician, songwriter, or producer? Or are you wanting to start a career in the music industry? If so, then this podcast is for you. On the Do That Music Thing podcast, we'll be interviewing subject matter experts, artists, and other leaders in the music industry to identify actionable strategies to move you forward in your career, spark some inspiration, and at the least just have some fun talking about music. So let's get to it and do that music thing. Good morning and welcome to another amazing episode of the Do That Music Thing podcast, where we are talking with anyone and everyone in the music industry, making moves and getting to that successful place in their careers. And you know, we've had a really amazing run so far. We've talked with producers, songwriters, marketers. We've talked to style aficionados. We've talked to some really incredible people. But today, ladies and gentlemen, today we have an awesome show for you. We have the wonderful downtown mystic, the American rocker, Mr. Robert Allen. Robert, how are you doing today, sir?
Good, Chris. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Also on the show today, I love it when we get to have a three-way, and I mean that exactly the way that you heard it, is the amazing Chris Keaton. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great. I hope that I'm dressed, well enough for a three-way with the two of you gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Chris is known as the connector here in Music City. He does a lot of great work with management and consulting and publishing services. And if you haven't heard the episode that I did historically with Chris, I recommend you to go back and listen to it. It is wonderful. But today we have Robert and Chris. And Chris, explain to me the relationship between you and Robert. What's the deal?
Well, so Robert and I worked together quite a while ago. And essentially, I was working with him as just a song plugger. He gave me a group of songs and said, hey, let's go see if we can get them cut. Well, the cool thing about them was all of these songs were really rock and roll based. I mean, straight up, good old American rock and roll. You know, get into the verse, get into the chorus, get into the bridge, make a killer solo, and just make it all work. And they were these great crafted songs. And I had zero success with it. I mean, it was just like awful. But we developed a really great relationship over time. And recently, both of us have noticed that, you know, the sound that all of us are hearing, that noise is the walls of the genres of music crashing down. And Robert got to me and said, you know, I think it's time that we not only stick a flag in the sand, but advance the cause of good old four on the floor rock and roll. So we started working together just recently, and it's a real blessing to me. So what I'd like to do is introduce your audience to the Downtown Mystic, who is really successful, and he and I are hoping to take that success to another level. So ladies and gentlemen, my buddy Robert Allen. Go, babe.
Thank you, Chris. That was quite the intro. Well, yeah, I've been in the studio for the last few days, so I am really taking the Downtown Mystic persona to the max, since my eyes are probably not the greatest, but let me see you people out there. Anyway, yeah, so I've been doing this for quite a number of years. I started with rock and roll, as far as I can remember, always listening to the radio. And when the Beatles hit, my mother bought me a guitar, gave me some lessons, and my life course was kind of, that was it. And I wanted to just do music forever. And my goal was, when I got out of high school, to get to college and get a group together. Which I did, and started playing around and doing some coffee house tours and all. This is early 70s, so acoustic music was really big, and I was a huge Crosby, Stills and Nash fan, Buffalo Springfield. That's kind of my real influences in my writing and playing, and of course the Beatles and the Stones and all that from the mid 60s on. And I, wanted just, I got to get a record deal. That was whatever a record deal is for a musician is the goal. And that's all musicians really know. You get a record deal, you're set for life. You have the unfortunate part of that is that musicians have no idea what that means once you get the record deal, what that means, and actually keeping the record deal. Unfortunately, we did not get the record deal. We got production deals, publishing deals, came real close. It was a time of when I'm playing in CBGBs when it's just starting with the Ramones and Blondie and all those people would be talking to each other in between sets and all. It was quite a happening. And it was at the time when it was being called New Wave, which was actually probably the third wave. You had, Chuck Berry and Elvis and all that for the first wave of rock and roll. The Beatles started the second wave of rock and roll. And then in the late 70s, or around 80, you have New Wave. The Pretenders come in, the Police, Elvis Costello, all these people are in. And that was like a new wave of rock and roll called the third wave. And that's really what I was playing and writing at the time. But it got to a point where the deal didn't happen. I decided to go to LA, and I wasn't so at the point of when I quit the band that had been there for 10 years. We'd been trying to make it, and it was like, we're a really good band, but you had to be great. We were lucky enough to be playing on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, and one night we had actually done a single vinyl. And I decided just to put them on. I knew it was a very industry kind of place in New York, because I ran into Billy Joel, Mick Jagger. All these people were hanging out, and there would be record executives. So I thought one day, all right, I'm going to just put my single on the tables. It was a very intimate place. If you had 50 people in the place, it was packed. So we did our set, and at the end of the set, the waitress came up to me and said, "Can I have one of your singles for my boyfriend?" And, I said, "Yeah, sure." And it was just like a second, like a split. As I was handing it to her, it occurred to me, like, "Who's your boyfriend?" She goes, "Oh, Garry Tallent." And I went, "The bass player for Springsteen?" She goes, "Yeah." So, this is. And the next time we played there, she came and she says, "Garry wants to meet you. He loves this. He loves the single. He'd like to meet you." And it started a relationship. Garry came down, and I said, "I'm going to fire a bass player. Just want you to know." And he came up to me after the show. He goes, "I'm a bass player. I always kind of root for the bass players, but I got to tell you, that guy was terrible." So that started it. He actually became our bass player for like 8 or 9 months, because we got a production deal, went down to Washington, D.C., and we got in the backseat of a car with us and drove 7 hours down to DC. And it was a nightmare of a deal. And that was actually what kind of broke the camel's back, because just the engineer producer was sabotaging the project. And as a matter of fact, the studio I've just been in, Garry used to own, and he told me when he bought into the studio, he bought into it to learn how to be an engineer, particularly because he saw what we went through, and he said, "I never want anybody to go through that again." So that's kind of where my relationship with Garry, and then we recorded Garry and brought in Max Weinberg and did some tracks together. And then from there, I was getting older. I was hitting my mid 30s, and it was like the club scene I was tired of it. And I started my publishing company, Shala Music. And after a while, people were like, "You should manage people." People were coming up to me, and I started managing. I got a call from someone in a a writer in California, and she says, "You ever hear this band Shotgun Symphony?" And I said, "No." And she says, "They're from Jersey, but my daughters are out in England, and they did a show there. They said they're amazing. You should check these guys out," which I did, and they became my first clients. And I started making deals in Europe for them and in Japan, and I became a manager. That was my full-time thing. I still would write. I would still, write now and then, but it was getting pushed to the side a lot more. And then other people, a couple of bands and a single artist named Bruce Angler came in, and I said, you did you ever think about? He was actually in the band. There was, do you remember, Chris, at what was the show? Star Search with Ed McMahon?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They won it. They
Wow.
won the show, and he was kind of after they won, things started to fall apart, I guess, for him. And he's just said, I wanted to try my hand at writing, and he had a great voice. And I said, yeah, did you ever think consider doing these songs yourself? And that started it. I started working with him. We wrote a couple songs together and started recording together. And then I had bands come in, and that really around it was actually right after 9/11, I guess, in the early, and then around 2003, the music business was just like, there was that tsunami in Asia, and I always consider it to be the omen, because it like kind of washed over the music business, just fell apart. It was like I could get to any A&R guy I wanted to get, my bands in front of. And then all of a sudden they were all gone. They were selling real estate. It was just like this, like a tsunami hit the business. Everything changed, it seemed, overnight. And I was already getting kind of tired, because, I started my label for one of the bands and getting radio play. And when you're going in, you start talking in shorthand, like, what's the band? Well, they're like, Foo Fighter means Green Day. And you just start talking like that. And it's after a while, it's like, what does that mean? What does that even sound like? Do you even know what I'm talking about? Does anybody listen to music anymore? It just seemed like nobody really seemed to be into it the way. And I was just getting tired, and working with these younger guys, I just felt like I want to be creative again. I want to get back and start doing music again. And I took, there was one of the drummers, and matter of fact, when I was working with Chris, I came down to Nashville for the Americana Fest. And this drummer who had been in this band, he was playing in the honky tonks on Broadway. He was doing like 3 and 4 sets a night. It started like 6 o'clock and be done at 2 a.m. It was like crazy. But because of him, I thought, I wonder what my music would, what some of these songs would sound like with the younger guys playing it. And that was kind of the start of Downtown Mystic. I went in, cut 6 tracks, and I got hooked. And that was really the start of it. So my journey from there was to the internet happened, which was really a godsend, because, for instance, it's 1995. I go to Midem. Midem is in Cannes, which is in France. That's where they had the Cannes Film Festival. Well, every January they used to have the Midem, which was the biggest worldwide music symposium. Labels from publishers all around the world. You could just walk up to people, introduce yourself. But if you wanted to have a meeting ahead of time, you had to do this thing called a fax machine. And, you're just faxing people in Germany and Belgium. You have no idea what's going on. Fast forward 15 years, I had done my first Downtown Mystic release in 2010. And that's how I met Chris. And I decided to go to meet him that in January 2011. And all of a sudden, it was like they gave you a book. There were emails. before, if I could get 2 or 3 in 1995, I had 2 or 3 meetings. It was amazing. All of a sudden, I had a dozen meetings before I got there, just because of the internet and cell phones, and it was just everything just changed, and so the business has become a lot easier for anyone to really get into. But because of my background, because I had gone into publishing and I had gone into management, and I was hiring radio promoters for my bands, I started an indie label, Shala Music, and because of all that, I had knowledge that the average person doesn't have. So it was like I could just take shortcuts that would have taken that, I spent 20 years developing those shortcuts, but I could take shortcuts that allowed me to do things that I could never have done when I was trying to make it back in 1980. So, because of the internet, all of a sudden, streaming came in, Spotify, you had digital platforms. I could, why am I spending so much money to go to radio when it's really a game between labels? And they make it so hard because they spend so much money. That's why it costs so much money to promote a record I once read, and this is probably 20 years ago, but it was like around 2000. And I read something that to have a top 10 hit, $500,000. That's what it costs. To have your record heard on a your favorite radio station. The question was, how many times would it take for your record to be heard 3 times, and it had to be played something like 300-400 times before you would hear it as the average listener. So when you hear things like that, it's like you're just batting your head against the wall if you're going up against the industry that way. It's impossible. You can't win that game. All you can get out of it are moral victories, and at the end of the day, moral victories don't pay the bills. So there were digital platforms, and I thought, hey, let me try this, let me try that. And I would release a single, put it out to a digital platform. All of a sudden, I had a few hundred radio stations playing me around the world. I'm in 15 countries. I'm in 20 countries. And as I think our press release that Chris had a few weeks ago, I've been played on over 5,000 stations in 44 countries around the world. Do I need anything more than that to prove that I'm successful? I have, and because of the internet, I've become one of the top indie sync licensed artists in the world, because I have over 240 TV shows and films with my music in them. That never would have happened without the internet. So that's basically my story.
That is an incredible story. And also, I think that, as my therapist would say, we're going to unpack this. And I think that there's so much great information there. And you've done what a lot of people should be doing, and that is wearing all the hats. And until you can't, right? Delegation is a very important tool, and it's a very important skill, but you only delegate when you need to, when you have to. And when you're in the music industry, it's imperative. And I think someone like you that's been an artist, that's gone through production and publishing, and then you became manager, then now you're doing sync licensing. All of that experience has led up to some really incredible success with your solo artistry. One thing that I really want to get your input on is sync licensing. That is a huge deal right now, and one of the primary ways that artists releasing music can make money. You're not making it through radio play anymore. you're barely making it through touring. But sync licensing is a really unique opportunity for artists to get their music heard and get paid. So I would love to hear about your experience and how you've been so successful specifically in sync licensing.
Well, there's two things. Remember that trip I made to meet him in 2011? Um, I was with had gone with like there were like six people that we were all kind of there was two guys that put it together, and we'd have dinner every night together. And I'd see this big guy. He's a big black guy, about 6'7", 6'8". I always thought of Frank Thomas. He was from Chicago, so I immediately thought of Frank Thomas, the Big Hurt, who played for the White Sox. And we were just like passing ships in the night. And this guy, he had 12. I had 12 meetings in like 3 days. He had 12 meetings a day. And I was like, how's this guy doing this? And the very last night we said, you know what? Why don't we when we just go, there was one of the hotels that they always have, everybody hangs out at. And I said, why don't we go and have a couple of drinks and just get to know each other and compare notes. And that's what we did. And he was really getting into sync licensing. And I said, well, when we get back to the States, I'll send you some material. And if you can do anything, yeah, let's see what happens. And we, so now it's about 2012 or 2013, he sends me an email and it says, do you have any songs? Do you have any tracks that you recorded in the 80s, specifically 84, 85? And it's like, funny you should mention that, but I do. And the only reason why I had him on MP3 was I started managing this band Shotgun Symphony, and one of the labels I was in California having a meeting with one of their labels. The guy was out in California from Germany, and I was telling him about this, my project. I mentioned as soon as I mentioned Garry Tallent and Max Weinberg, his eyes lit up, and I sent him. He says, yeah, I want to do this. And because it's like early 90s, it's probably like 93, 94, and tape was going by the way of the dodo. You could forget your cassettes, you could forget your reel-to-reel, even that digital audio tape, which is what you did your mixes on in the studio. That was, that still had some time left, but not much. And CDs, there's this thing called a CD. It's supposed to be indestructible. You put your music on it. I wanted a CD. I wanted my songs on a CD. I knew I was not going to be able to use my reel-to-reels any longer. And I got this deal solely. It was called Used Records. I went by the name of Walker Reeves. I put this whole thing together, and I got a CD with my music on it, which was all I wanted. So now we're back in 2011, 2013, and Eddie's sending me this email. Do you have anything for? So I said, yeah, because now, because of computers and all, I could make MP3s. So MP3s came along. It was like, oh my God, you can have your song in your pocket, so it was crazy. So I sent him like 3 or 4 things, and he comes back and goes, oh man, this is great. Oh, it's fantastic. He was pitching Alexandra Patsavis, who at the time had Chop Shop Music. She was like one of the top music supervisors in LA, and she did Grey's Anatomy and all those shows that broke bands. So anyway, she was doing a prequel to Sex and the City. It's when Carrie graduates high school, and so it happens like around 83, 84. And I don't know if Alex was just busting Eddie's chops. It's like, you think you can get me something? Okay, I got a show that's going to be in the 80s. Get me something that was recorded in the 80s. Not, yeah, anybody can take, I recorded these things in 1985. He takes a song, she loves it. The show only ran for 2 years, but on the first season, the last show of the first season, they're having a party. I guess it's supposed to be like Cosmopolitan, who she worked for, whatever, the magazine. And there's a party going on in the background. There's a DJ, and my song starts playing. I was like, this is unbelievable. And I always tell people, That's why music is forever. 1985, do you think I ever thought I'd see one of those songs? That song, Fly Like the Wind, is like, I've probably made the most money in sync licensing. It's been on that show. It just in a couple of years ago, it was in a movie, a Disney movie, Flora and Ulysses. It's like, and he gets another one. He gets another one. He tells me there's a movie called Things Are Gonna Be Great, starring Bryan Cranston. And he gets a song of mine called Without a Trace from that time period in 1986. I'm like, how are you doing this? But that's, the internet. There was a thing called Sonic Bins. It's still out there. I would try these things. Okay, for $2, you can submit your song to this company that's looking for music for their music library. I have no idea what a music library is. I'm not even sure what sync licensing is. I get a response back. Yeah, we want your song for our music library. Really? The company was called Jingle Punks. They were just starting out. This is around 2008, 2009. They would go on to be the biggest music supervisor for all they did the theme song for Porn Stars, all those shows. I've had my music on was it American Pickers, like 25, 26 shows, all because of them. But it wasn't easy. I suddenly getting, I get a BMI statement for like, I get a check for $200 for my song was on The Voice. I never really watched it. I watched one show of The Voice. It was the second show of the first season. My song is on that show. And I saw it and I never heard it. I had to go back after 6 months later. I get the check and I'm like, how is this? I look it up on YouTube. I'm watching the show and I remember seeing this girl walking and my music's playing in the background. And I never heard it. It was like so crazy. So they had a party and they would have a Christmas party down in Soho in New York City. And I went second year. I had just done my Standing Still CD, my first CD. And everybody in the company, it was like 40 or 50 people that work in the company. They were all musicians. And they were all playing on stage. And I noticed that the guy who does the contracts that you have to sign when you send the music in, he's a guitar player. I look at him. I say, hey, I introduced myself to him. His name is Bill. And I said, you like guitar? He said, I have this album. There's all guitars. And he goes, check it out. And a couple of weeks go by, I had to follow up. I didn't hear from him. I said, if you don't like it, that's fine. He goes, no. He goes, we got a whole bunch of stuff going out to American Pickers. Send it to me. And that started it. I probably, oh my God, they've probably taken 30 songs of mine and put them on 100 or so shows. It's so that's how I started with sync licensing.
The two big things that I got out of that, Robert, were one, relationships, right? You're meeting people, you're staying in contact with them. And two is that you are not afraid to experiment in new technology. And that is one thing I think as artists, you get really comfortable kind of doing the same thing, right? When you're a band, right? My background is in rock music, and you know this, Robert, but when you're in a rock band, you write those 10, 12 songs, you get your show, you record those 10, 12 songs, and you play those 10 or 12 songs for the next like 2 years. And, you get them down pat, and there's not a lot of deviation. So inherently you don't experiment, and you have to experiment now. You have to try new technology. You can't be afraid to go out and pitch music, use new digital tools. It's impossible with how fast things are now. So those are the two things that I really got out of that statement around sync licensing. One thing too that I really want to pull out over your story is fluidity. You are just flowing through the motions. You are taking the opportunities. You're almost, I'm sure there were a lot of no's in there, but you are just kind of making success as you are floating through this music industry, trying different things and doing different things. And I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think more artists should approach their art and their business that way.
Yes, without a doubt. Even I remember I did a podcast a year or so ago, and the guy said, you did if it wasn't for you putting your single on those tables that night, you'd never have met Garry Tallent. Just taking, nobody else was doing it. I never saw anybody do it at that time. But I thought, what do I got to lose? I've got 1,000. I can't throw these things away fast enough. And it's weird. It's just a strange thing, and an odd thing. If you want a deviation, I'll really deviate. So it's I was not big on. I'm like, like you're talking about most musicians who are like, Spotify. What do you make? Yeah, let me make a penny. So I was kind of like, I would get a check. They would actually send me a check for 1 cent. It cost 40 cents for the stamp. What are you people crazy? So it's probably July of 2020. We're in quarantine. Pandemic's hitting. And the pandemic was great for me because all of a sudden I realized I had a catalog of music. And I had my label, and I could just put out music digitally. I didn't have to think about making CDs and, printing up all this stuff. It was like, all I need is a cover and an MP3, a WAV file, and I got a release. So I'm in the office, and my wife goes and gets the mail, and she says, "Oh, you got a letter here from Asbury Park Hotel." I'm like, "Nobody at the Asbury Park Hotel." And I'm reading this thing, and it's like, are you Robert Allen? You had a band called the Tupelos that was playing in Asbury Park around 1979, 1980. I'm writing a book for my publisher wants me to write a book about the Asbury Park scene from like 79 to 83. And you were like, I talked to some of the locals, and they said that your band put on one of the best rock and roll shows they've ever seen. And I'm like, okay, I'm getting punked here. Who the hell knows who knows about this band and who was there? That's 1979. I played the Fast Lane in Asbury Park. The guy's name is Nick Cohen. And I look it up, and Nick Cohen wrote this book. He's considered one of the elder statesmen of British rock criticism. He wrote this book called A Wop Bop, A Loo Bop, A Bop, which is the Long Tall Sally riff. And it was like one of the first rock criticism books that he was friends with Pete Townsend. Pete Townsend called him about when he was writing a Pinball Wizard because he knew the guy was up on pinball. He also is the guy who wrote a short story that appeared in the Atlantic that would go on to be the basis for Saturday Night Fever. He wrote the screenplay for Saturday Night Fever. And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? So he was flying back to London. I sent him an email. I said, I got to ask you, how in the world, because I'm still thinking I'm getting put on here. He goes, I met the owner of the Fast Lane, and he handed me your single with Sweet Little 16. We had done a cover of Chuck Berry's Sweet Little 16. And I was like, holy. And something clicked. Just from reading that letter, something clicked. And I thought, wait a minute. I have all these, you're talking about, your rock band. We recorded. I have recordings from 1978, 1979, all through the 80s. I went solo and doing my own thing. Hey, wait a minute. I can actually release those things that I thought were long gone, because you know this as a musician, you sweat and toil writing those songs, you record them with your band, you do showcases, and you get the no. And what do? You know, your life is over. What do? You go on, you get married, you have kids, whatever. So something clicked in my head, and I said, you know what? I'm going to release all that stuff. And I have the cover from my used record CD. I'm going to call it Downtown Mystic, Used Records History, 1979 to 1985. And I released it, and I said, you know what? If I make a nickel on every one of those songs, I will have been successful. I will have actually made money on my music. I don't care if it's a penny. And from that point on, I got hooked on streaming. And I would look at streaming, and of course, the Drakes and all are in the billions. But I was like, someday I want to get 100,000 streams. That's my goal. I'm going to build to that. And with my last release this year, Amerikarma, I'm almost to 5 million streams on Spotify. So I've blown my own thing out of the water.
I love that, setting goals and then blowing them out of the water. Love it.
Right. But that's just how crazy this, again, a blast from the past. You think music is dead and buried? No, not anymore. I'm living proof of it.
Well, I I really got to just jump in here, because what I think is so great about my relationship with Robert, but also my relationship with you, Chris, is this. I mean, your friggin' podcast is called Do That Music Thing. That is exactly what Robert has been doing all his life. He has never stopped doing that music thing. It takes different forms at different times, but he has always stayed true to his muse. And again, that's one of the things that I find so incredibly attractive about his career, his catalog, and his outlook on the business. Is just like you said, he ain't scared of shit. He'll try anything. And in order to do that music thing, you got to. But I also got to give him creds on this right here. I do a newsletter 3 times a week. I never even thought about doing a newsletter. But because Robert used to do one, I thought, you know what? If that guy's doing it, I'm going to start doing one too. And now it's become one of the greatest tools that I have to reach new clients, new artists, and just the public at large. So thank you for that, Robert. That's the last nice thing I'll ever say about you in public. There it is right there.
That's so weird that you got the newsletter for me. That's crazy.
But
That's cool.
That's a great example, though, of, connections, and it's okay to borrow. Look at artists that are doing what you want to do. Look at people that are doing that you want to do, and replicate it. You don't have to copy it, but you can replicate it. I've got a lot of experience in marketing, and I've started agencies, and I would always tell people when I would go speak at conferences, I would say, I'll tell you exactly how I do things. There is no secret sauce. Okay, sure, there's inversions on a chord, but there's only one way to play an E chord per se, right? I mean, there's only so many notes in an E chord you can use, octaves, but I mean, it's an E chord, right? There's no secret sauce to it. The only trick is 98% of people won't even get started. So if that 2% wants to use my ideas, do it. There is no secret sauce. So I don't know. I'm loving this conversation, and I want to transition a little bit into talking about rock music. And, Chris, at the beginning of the show, I think you said that, Robert is just really pushing that 4 on the floor rock music. That is what I love. That is traditional. I call it straight ahead rock music. That's what I've always called it. The bands that I was in 2004 onward were opening for early 80s and 80s rock bands. That's how much we loved it, is we ended up getting to open for those people. We had a good stylistic thing. But since 2004, 2005, as you mentioned earlier, Robert, the industry has kind of, it kind of tanked there. And along with that, rock music has slowly been in a decline. And when I say rock music, I mean more heavier forms of straight ahead rock music. It has declined. Guitar driven rock music has declined. However, in the last, 2 years, we're starting to see an influx of bands like The Struts, Greta Van Fleet. Like, people want to hear, not older people, not people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. When I went to go see Greta Van Fleet, my wife and I were probably some of the oldest people there. So there is clearly a want and a need for guitar-driven rock music, but we're not, for whatever reason, it's not being delivered. And I think the fact that, you've got 5 million streams as an indie artist completely, validates that thought and that statement that clearly there is an appetite for rock music. And new rock music, it's just not being fed. What do you think we could do about that?
Well, that's actually what I'm joining up with Chris now, is that for probably the last, at least good 6 or 7, maybe even more, but 10. But anyway, I've been I'm a believer in, I've been trying to bring back rock and roll. So rock and roll dates back to the 50s and the 60s, and even Tom Petty, and I forget, I think it was the Hall of Fame songwriter speech. He said something like, "It's not easy to do, and it's not rock. Rock and roll and rock are two different things. You have, like you're saying, the 80s started a whole different brand of rock that doesn't really doesn't really have any roots to traditional rock and roll. And I get compared to Tom Petty all the time, and Springsteen, because of the guys that play with. But I did this album I released in 2022 called 21st Century Rock and Roll. I've been talking about it, and I said, I'm finally going to do this record. And it was about, I want to bring back rock and roll to the mainstream. And that's going to bring back, if I can come back, then yeah, you're rock, and that's all going. And my productions are all guitar. Every now and then I'll throw in a keyboard if I feel it needs it, but I'm strictly based on all guitars. And yeah, I'm retro. I'm a retro artist. And like you've been saying, you say 2 years. It's like, I called Chris up and I said, I would actually call a bunch of people. And I said, yeah, I'm hearing the term rock and roll coming back into the lexicon. Where, I see, I was watching Brandi Carlile's Laurel Canyon concert. And she says at the beginning, she's saying, "Oh, this is really rock and roll, and that's rock and roll. It's risk. It's a risk. That's what rock and roll is, taking a risk." And then Jason Isbell said something in his documentary mentioning, staying true to rock and roll. And Mike Campbell, who's Tom Petty's guitar player, who has the Dirty Knobs, he's all about rock and roll. So I just felt like, yeah, there's this. And then I looked and I said, huh. Actually gotten, not my latest album is called American Karma. It's been my career defining album, and I it was like, I now have a catalog. I have 9 albums. I actually have a catalog, which I didn't have when I met Chris, because I had my first album, and it was like, I had no idea what I was doing. Like, song plugger, yeah, let's try it. And then I was like, and I said this back in the late 80s. I said, I always felt that Nashville was going to be the last bastion for American rock and roll, where you're talking the 4 on the 4, whether it's your style, my style. There's guys in country now, Morgan Wallen, they're all doing it. Everybody's rocking out in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's like, okay, I think I actually know what I can use Chris for now. I actually think I know what he does. And I actually contacted him, and it's his birthday. It's like he's having his birthday, and I said, "Look, man," I said, "I have this catalog. I have the Downtown Mystic Rock and Roll catalog, and I want to take it to Nashville. I want to, and I'm not." I said, "I'm never going to be that guy that writes a hit country song. I can't do it. I'm not going to write a song, putting in, say, yeah, we got to have a beer or a shot of tequila. No, I ain't going to do it. It's not my style. They do. There's plenty of guys that are great down there that can do it all day long, and I'm not going to try to compete with them. What I do is unique to myself. No one, you hear me on the radio, I don't sound like anyone else because I'm retro, and retro is always in. Sometimes not as in as, and sometimes it comes back, the wheel is always turning. And I think the wheel has been turning now where I think rock is coming back. It's not going to take over the Drakes and the Bad Bunnies of the world, but it can make a big comeback where people are like, yeah, you know what? There's a groove here. There's actually, because the difference between rock and roll and rap, basically, hip hop is a rhythm form of music. It's rhythm based. It's all about the groove. It's all about the beat. Rock and roll is about melody and rhythm. Yeah, rhythm's part of it, but you actually have to have a song. You actually have to know how to play your instrument and be able to sing. So it requires a lot more than just programming a bass and drum track. And so my thing is, like I said to Chris, I said, I want to have you go and meet with people that are interested in what I do is, and in my catalog, I probably have the most up-tempo songs of any artist in the world. I'll make that statement definitive because for me, a medium tempo song is a ballad. And most artists have medium tempo and ballads, and maybe they put one or two. For me, the medium tempo is that's the change of pace song for me. It's usually up tempo stuff. So it's like, look, if you've got an artist that's making an album and he's going to have more than his chock full of country hits on it, but if it's mid tempo and all, you still need to pace the energy of an album. And that's what you infuse it with an up tempo song. And you know this as better as anyone. If you're playing live and you want to get the crowd going, play an up tempo track, play a fast song. That gets everybody going. So that's the kind of subtlety of my, it's not for everybody. My catalog's not going to be for everybody. And I probably would be pushing it towards the more established guys like a Marty Stewart. Marty Stewart is rock and roll. He's bluegrass. He's country. But he also does, he also does other people's music. So I think a guy like Marty Stewart would hear one of my songs and immediately know what to do with it. And the other thing about it is nobody knows who Downtown Mystic is. Nobody knows who that rock and roller song. My songs are good enough that whoever does it, they can make it their own. Keith Urban does a song, it's going to become a Keith Urban song. The Eagles on their first album, it was Take It Easy, right? That was the hit. The second best song in that album is called Peaceful Easy Feeling. On their third album, which is the album that broke them, On the Border, the lead track is Already Gone. Already Gone is one of the great Eagle rock and roll songs. The Eagles did not write Already Gone, and they did not write Peaceful Easy Feeling. Do you know who did? Maybe you did. It's Jack Tempchin. Who the hell is Jack Tempchin? Eagles songs. That's what you say. So I'm looking to get someone interested, and it only takes one. It only takes one person to go, yeah, we'll try this. And that's what you go for. We said before, I don't hear no. At the end of the day, you want to hear one of the three things I'm going to tell you at the end of the day, you don't hear no's anymore. The only thing you're looking for is yes. Because no's are worthless. Yes is the only word you want to hear.
Well, I love it.
So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Well, Chris, thanks for bringing Robert on the show. It's been awesome.
Man,
rock and roll.
This is like, well, thank you for saying that. And thank you for having us on the show, because what I really want to do now is I want the world to meet him, because he is so unique. He has he says that just now he's never going to hear no. I think he's made a career out of that. He's kind of like Jerry Weintraub always used to say, or they used to say about Jerry, he never hears the word no. When he hears the word maybe, he hears yes. And when he gets to yes, he gets it done. So that's Robert in a nutshell. Oh, but you know what we got to do, since he is the downtown mystic and he does wear the shades, I think we need to pay him a little homage here.
Let's do it.
Yeah. And then we'll just do this. La 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 la. Thank you for having us on your show, buddy. This is fun.
Yeah, Faust, thank you. It was
Well,
fun.
real quick, before we go, I need to do the three things. We got to do our three. We got to do our three things. So this is one of my favorite parts of the show. It's where I get to ask the guest, what are three actionable items that you would give someone starting out in the music industry? What are those three pieces of advice that they can go make change today? Let's hear them, Robert.
Right. So this is number one, and it's probably the most important one. And it's for everybody, artist, producer. If you're starting out, learn what publishing is. Learn what that publishing is broken in. When you write a song, suddenly half of it is the writer's share, your share, and the other half is the publisher's share. And learn that. That's number one, because if you don't know, that's where everybody makes their money in the business. If you don't know that, you're going to get screwed. That's where, and it's very simple. It gets a little confusing with the numbers at times, because you say, well, I got 100% of the publishing, but it's only 50% of the audience. Yeah. So it gets a little crazy, but it's the simplest thing. Because when you write a song, all of a sudden, business-wise, you got 50-50. Publishing and writing, and if you're the writer and the publisher, you now got 100% of the song. And that's what the people in Nashville make deals on. Dolly Parton was told when she was going to have Elvis wanted to record her track. What was it? The Whitney Houston thing that she did, and the Colonel told her, said, "Oh yeah, always love you." The Colonel told her that we get Elvis gets the publishing if you do your songs, because I can't give up the publishing on the song. It was a heartbreak that Elvis couldn't record her song, but she held on to it, and Whitney Houston put it through the roof. So that's the other thing. And it's kind of an old cliche, but it's about, not taking no, because when one door closes, just understand that another door is opening. So if somebody says no, there's going to be a yes. And the other thing I would say is I'm a big believer. My personal motto is success is how you define it. And I used to get so crazed with my the bands that I manage, and I was just trying to tell them, it's like, your song getting played, and they'll be like, oh yeah, but it's like, dude, do you understand how many CDs went across the programmer's desk today? And I sent it on a Tuesday. He's playing it on his show on Saturday, which means the minute he got it, he opened it. If you don't think that's a success, get out of the business. You have to take everything, and I don't care how small it is. If you can define it as a success for yourself, you are going to just keep affirming that you are worthy and successful. And then that's, at the end of the day, like Chris says, I always put my money where my mouth is. It's always on me. And if I don't believe in myself, who is? So if you don't believe in yourself, nobody's going to believe in it for you. And even if you got a manager and you got a label and you got a publisher and you got all that, at the end of the day, no one cares about your career more than you.
True.
So those are pretty much my three things.
Well, Robert Allen, Downtown Mystic, Chris Keaton, The Connector, thank you so much for being on the Do That Music Thing podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Do That Music Thing podcast. To learn more about me, the host, Christopher Foust, you can catch me online at christopherfoust.com, on Instagram at chrisfaustmusic, or on Twitter at chrisjamesgtr. If you'd like to be a guest on the Do That Music Thing podcast, please feel free to email me at chrisfaustmusic@gmail.com. If you're a fan of the show, head on over and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Foust. Let's go do that music thing.